Hey everyone, FaZe here. A couple days ago, they released the world premiere trailer of Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I wanted to do a video just talking a little bit about what to expect as far as the plot, the time, and all of that. I'm a big history buff. That's why I'm a huge fan of the Assassin's Creed series. The whole concept of, nonfiction history, but pulling in real factual history is amazing. The work that Ubisoft has done to try and be as authentic as possible while still creating a interesting story is something that I really respect. So yeah, let's jump in and we'll go through this trailer. I'll pause at various points in order to make comments or touch on certain things. As you can tell, it's Valhalla, so it's probably going to be about the Vikings.
They are heartless.
Pretty good aesthetic so far. So pause right there.
Barbarians.
So they mention godless. When they say godless, they're not saying they don't believe in anything. They just don't believe in, God in the monotheistic Christian sense. The Viking people were pagans, and they were polytheists. They believed in multiple different gods. Another thing is the Vikings weren't a specific people. In the sense that they weren't, when you use the word Viking, it's not like using the word Canadian, right? It doesn't represent a particular nation or specific clan or that kind of thing. It more is like saying North American. So it represents people of the fjord, because a lot of those places, Norway, Iceland, all that, they were within a particular area where there was a lot of fjords and that kind of thing. So that's where the nomenclature comes from. But yeah, they were polytheists. They believed in gods like Thor, Odin, Hela, who represented certain concepts. War, thunder, knowledge, that kind of thing, similar to the Greeks or the Egyptians. And the other thing about this is they believe that their gods walk among them, interacting and blessing and taking action. They're not just sitting somewhere and doing nothing and watching how things turn out. They are directly impacting the events of their people. So for them, a lot of superstition in the sense of signs directly from their god and that. So they weren't godless. They had lots of gods. So obviously they're doing some kind of ritual to, probably a pre-raid ritual to bless them. As you can see, they're taking off. So you might have saw there was a raven. Ravens are the symbol of Odin. So if someone were to see that, it would be a good sign that Odin is with them.
They murder and kill blindly.
So an interesting thing is a lot of people thought, they think of Vikings, they think barbarians and but they were surprisingly sophisticated. They had what they call things, which aren't just like things like the stuff on my desk. It's things which were kind of meetups of people amongst the particular town, and they would converse about particular issues. What are we going to do? What should we do about this particular situation, food and logistics. They also did believe in bathing. It was something they did frequently, whereas England, bathing wasn't quite as common. It wasn't something that was like, you should bathe. It was like, I guess you can if you want, if you're feeling really dirty, but you don't need to. Whereas the Vikings did it frequently, and they believed heavily in good hygiene. So they weren't really barbaric. They were a warfaring group, though. Okay, so this is cool here. So for those that don't know, when the Danish came in, so originally England, it had the native British folk who were underneath the Romans for a long time, and then the Angles and the Saxons were invading from similar areas, but I think they were more from Germanic tribes, kind of more from mainland Europe. And they were coming in and raiding, right? They were attacking, they were pushing in, and they wanted to take what the bounties of England for themselves. So eventually Rome pulled out. It was too expensive, it was costly, they were having issues, so they pulled out of England, left the natives to their own devices. Eventually they were pushed away, and the Angles and the Saxons kind of interbred, and that's where the term Anglo-Saxon comes from. It was the Angles, Saxons, boom, there you go. That's also where the term English comes from, English, which is spoken by the Angles. So that's why we have such similar roots to Germanic within English words. So what happened though is the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms grew, and they became more England, right? And then the Danes started to come in. Similar situation, pushing in. And they actually took land and were holding it, and they started to settle there. And after a certain amount of time, an agreement was made between King Alfred, which we'll talk more about him, but he basically said that land is yours. That is yours to do what you want with. Go ahead and enjoy. So they went and started to build. So you can see here they're starting to build up, and the land was known as Danelaw. That's what it was called. And there's, I believe, manuscripts of the agreement. But yeah, so they're starting to settle and take England as their own home, you know, and raise families and land, do all that.
Lands they will never defend, never love.
So I spoke about King Alfred. This is King Alfred. King Alfred was I think he's the only English monarch to be known as the Great. So King Alfred the Great basically was the first one to envision a unified England. He was the King of Wessex, and eventually he went and kind of connected with like the Kingdom of Mercia, which is kind of more northwestern England right now, and then Northumbria, which was kind of more to the northeast. So, but he worked with Mercia. They were border territories, right? They bordered each other. So eventually his family went on to take Mercia, and it spread. But yeah, he was the first to really see this vision of a unified England, this great high kingdom. So you could really say he was the first kind of king of England in a way, but he wasn't. That was more, I believe, Ethelstan, who was his grandson, I believe. But or King Edward, one of the two there. But he's well respected. He was a very well learned man, a very strong Christian. He documented a lot of writing, especially around this time. We're coming out of the Dark Ages, where not as much was recorded. So he did a lot of recording because of his strong faith. A lot of monks, a lot of religious locations, and yeah, so a lot was documented. So he was big on that. So we know quite a bit about him. But seems like he'll be maybe a main antagonist. Not quite sure.
They will understand.
As you can see, how we know it's Alfred is you can see right here where my mouse cursor is. It says Alfred. In this case, his name is spelled A-E instead of just A. Anglo-Saxon, they often had this A-E combination, and it made an A sound. So Alfred, Ithelstan, that kind of thing. So looks like this is a declaration of war, probably against the Danes. So it is, because it's a declaration of war and not like defensive, my assumption is this is taking place after he's given them land, possibly with Danelaw. Again, my assumption, but he's given land to them to settle, but they're still coming in and encroaching on their territory, because they do end up taking things like York, which is at the time Efferwich, and that kind of thing. So this could take place after that, when there was kind of an agreement, and now things are getting tense. I'll pause again. My prediction is he's being manipulated, maybe, right? He wanted good faith. He wanted to build a relationship with them to protect, their kingdom. But it seems like that guy behind him is like a general or something, I could see him being a Templar manipulating. I could see King Alfred being a non-Templar entity, but being surrounded by Templar who were trying to control him, you know, as is the Templar way. So I could see that being the case, and being against welcoming these people to their lands, the Templar that is. So Vikings, very well-known shipbuilders. They had their longboats, often ornate bows and that kind of thing. My speculation is we won't see a lot of ocean warfare, which is, you know, for instance, the previous few that we've had, there has been naval warfare, and I don't expect us to have it with this one. The like long ships weren't really designed too much for that. For like long travel, yes, but not necessarily full on ship to ship warfare. It was more meant to hit the ground running kind of thing. So I don't expect us to see that, but you never know. And at the time, there wasn't really a major navy, you know, like England did develop, you know, later on over the next, like towards the 14th plus centuries. So, yeah, I don't think we'll see a lot of naval combat with this one. Oof, that would be rough. That'd be very rough to see coming down on you. Ooh. And that could have major ramifications. If those boats are burned, they have no retreat, which, if anyone knows Sun Tzu, you want to always leave your enemy an option to retreat. If you don't, they literally have to fight to the death, which means you'll lose more men in that. It's better for them to retreat and you be able to take that ground than to lose a bunch in order to take that ground. You can just let them run. So burning all their boats, probably not a good idea unless it's a surefire win, but it's dangerous. Ooh. Very intense fighting. Very enthusiastic fighters. Ooh, that spear going through would not be fun. So yeah, Vikings, they tended to use axes, really. Like there are swords, but you know, axes are really what they're known for. They had a variety. They had, you know, their more battle axes, which you would use for like as a sword, right? But they also would have had throwing axes, you know, for short ranged combat. So I'll get to that in a sec, because there's a point in here that I want to talk about. So this is Odin, but what's really interesting about it is it has kind of a Ezio vibe to it a little bit. Like it gives me, at this point in time, the assassins are not the assassins, at least as far as we know. In Odyssey and Origins, they were just known as the Hidden Ones. So they were these proto-assassins, proto-Templar ideologies and organizations, but they didn't have those names. They weren't the Brotherhood of Assassins and the Templar Order. Templar Order would come more with the Knights Templar, with that formation, and the Brotherhood of Assassins would have been more towards the around the same time during the Crusades, for instance, Assassin's Creed 1, so shortly before that. So this time it would be the Hidden Ones. So this kind of is cool because it kind of feels like an Ezio Altair vibe when they're older and wiser, but it's not what we think it is. So for those that don't know, Odin is often represented by ravens. He had pet ravens that you know, he had a few pets, but ravens were ones very close to him. So I'm just going to scroll back here. So what I like about this is kind of the, let's see if we can dial in here. There we go. He's against a tree. And what's cool about the tree thing in my mind, there's this tree within this this battlefield, is it makes me think of Yggdrasil, which was the tree of life. and there was a connection with Odin with that. Some people might know Odin was known as Odin the One-Eyed, and that's because I believe it was Yggdrasil had a pool of water, which was like a pool of knowledge, and you had to give something in order to take. So he wanted to get knowledge, so he had to sacrifice, and he sacrificed one of his eyes. He didn't do both, so he doesn't have all of the knowledge, but he gave up some. And that's what's cool about Norse mythology, is the fact that Odin just doesn't know everything, right? He's kind of like a person, but he's a god. So he's got this elevated status, but there's still things that he has to work towards and achieve, which is very relatable, I believe, I would assume, for the Norsemen, because it's something they can empathize with. They can feel connected to their gods more. I'm curious what the runes say. You can see an R and an M, and then I would assume that's kind of a Y, but you can't really make out what it says, so I'm not sure. But yeah, so the raven goes again, like I mentioned earlier on in the video. That would be a strong symbol, especially in battle, to see a raven. It would be a very strong feeling of this being your fight. So it's interesting to see the plate armor, because especially now, like, Roman influence is kind of pulled out a lot. So the most common armor that you would see at this time would be chainmail. That would be kind of one of the more common on both sides, but leather armor as well would have been even more common, just because people didn't have the money to buy the armor. A lot of people were like soldiers by profession, so it's what you could get. So you wouldn't see plate armor like this. I think it's a lot more aesthetic choice. You can see there's a really heavy Roman feel to it. If anything, you wouldn't really see that kind of regalia, the Roman style plume on the helmet. It wouldn't be, really practical, but it has influences. For instance, the Saxons, they would have had the nose guard and the eyes and that kind of thing. The plume, not as common, but this is an elite soldier, so who knows. So one thing before we get to that, I'm very curious who this character is. When I did my own research, I was trying to see if there was any well-known generals at the time for King Alfred. So I'm not sure who this character is. I believe, obviously, they've got to be a general. They have strong sway over all of these troops. It could be some form of elderman, which is just like kind of the really the like richest person. The richest people of a town or an area, but I'm not sure. So if you guys know, let me know in the comments who you think this this fellow is, because I'm not sure. From other pop culture, for instance, The Last Kingdom, there's Steapa, however you pronounce his name, but he was more like a close guard, not so much a general. So it's tough to say. For all I know, this could be, although unlikely, it could be Ethelred of Mercia, who is king of Mercia. And at this time, there was kind of this alliance happening, and but Ethelred, he would probably consider himself on fairly equal ground to Alfred, so he'd probably have a crown or something, or more fancy regalia, not quite be so intensely into things. And there we have it. The introduction of the Hidden Blade. So obviously, the main protagonist is an assassin. It's pretty obvious. They would have had it from a different perspective for all of this. I really like how this looks. It's got what looks to be some emeralds in it. This could potentially be the first real main one. I am curious too. I guess though, this is coming from the top. Traditionally, we've seen the underside of the wrist, which, because of the way the contraption was designed, we know that historically they had to remove the ring finger. That was a common thing until improved versions of it didn't require having to, like, that was the rite of passage to being an assassin, if you guys remember from earlier Assassin's Creed, was you had to cut off that finger. That was your commitment to the Brotherhood. In order to use the hidden blade, you need to cut the ring finger off, so that way you could hit the blade, like the blade would go out without stabbing into your finger. So it was kind of, that was how it was meant to be done. But with this style, no lost fingers. It's more punchy, but it's not as subtle as being able to just do that. So, you know, there's trade-offs. It's a more obvious weapon. It's not so hidden. So yeah, there you have it. We're getting pretty close to, we're not super close, but this year we'll see this. It will be coming out to all platforms: Xbox, Series X, PC, PlayStation 4, and PlayStation 5. I think maybe Stadia as well, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, I'm really excited to see how this goes, because one of the things is this period in time. So this takes place at the turn of the 9th century. Alfred died in 898, I believe. Feel free to correct me if you're wrong, but I do have it's about there. I could be off by a year. It might be 899. But so this is happening just before then. So this could be earlier on. This could be pre-Danelaw. So you know, it's tough to tell where this is taking place. And the Danes originally invaded quite a bit earlier with the fight. I think it was Lindisfarne. I think that was Danish attack, but this wouldn't be that early because we have King Alfred. So this would have to be taking place at the end of the 9th century. And it's often misrepresented in pop culture. You know, people show this period of time, and it's coming right out of the Dark Ages. We don't have a really good idea of what that was like. There wasn't written documents, not as much art. It was a time where culture wasn't as frequently explored. It was more about survival. That's what happens, is when people are really focused on just living and getting by. Especially the Dark Ages were especially exacerbated by the Romans pulling out, or that's really what caused it. So these people were left to their own devices. They didn't have the infrastructure, the knowledge, the manpower to run all the common amenities. So a lot of that stuff just started to stop. Obviously they had the roads, and those were really important. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where this properly takes place and all the characters involved, because it's a time period, again, not super explored. So yeah, and I am very curious to see whether or not King Alfred is treated as a puppet by maybe the Templar Order started, or they're still Proto-Templar. But I think he might be kind of caught in the middle of this. So I'm curious to see where they go with that, because he did a lot of good things. He did quite a bit and really pushed them out of the Dark Ages, the Anglo-Saxon Britain at this time. So yeah, I'm excited to see what happens. Let me know what you guys think. Do you think this is pre-Danelaw or post-Danelaw? Do you think this is incursions into Anglo-Saxon land like Mercia and Wessex? Or do you think this is taking place before Danelaw is established, and we might see the lead up to Danelaw, and that might be kind of the resolution we see? Let me know. Put it in the comments. I wanted to add one thing. I forgot to bring this up. So for those that didn't know, they did a pre-trailer hype stream where they revealed the theme of the next Assassin's Creed, and they made art. So there's a time lapse you can find and all that. But one of the things they showed, you can see it in the top right here, is this really fancy castle. So one of the things that I find very interesting about this, and maybe this was just the artist and there wasn't really historical consultation on this, and they just were doing something to make it look cool and pretty and hype people up. But this type of stone-worked castle, many stories, real extravagant, fancy keeps. This wouldn't have been made by 9th century Anglo-Saxons. Often their fortifications were made out of wood. Monasteries and churches and chapels and that kind of thing, they would have maybe been stone just to really hold them up, but keeps and ramparts and that would have been wood. They would have been primarily wood. So this is more Norman, and the Normans didn't come in until the 11th century, after kind of the Danish invasion stopped and they kind of were pushed out or assimilated. So this is one thing that I was curious about. I'm hoping that they focus on historical accuracy. There might have been some stoneworks like this. Let me know if you know any off the top of your head, but I believe pre-Norman England, stone keeps weren't really a thing. It just it was the expertise of the Normans and not so much the Anglo-Saxons. So we'll have to see. We'll find out. But yeah, that's what I wanted to add on that. Again, thank you so much, guys, for watching. Feel free to check out my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/phasepire, where I stream a variety of games. Right now we're doing a lot of Animal Crossing. Anyways, thank you so much, guys, and take care. Bye.